Sooner rather than later, Penn State needs some good transfer portal news because right now it's looking kind of ugly.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
That is right. You are locked on to Penn State football in this crossover episode. My name is Seyko. I'm the host of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Brian Smith, college football expert, recruiting expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, host of The Portal, as we're going to talk all things transfer portal. We're going to get to the coaching staff, the current state of it. Penn State's targeting D'Anton Lynn. Not every assistant has been named thus far, so where things stand there, but all the player movement. Penn State players going out, Iowa State players, anybody else that's going to be coming in to Penn State. So Brian's the perfect guy to talk about all of this. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Brian, I have to start the show off this way that it's starting to look ugly because the number one player in the transfer portal right now is from Penn State, Chaz Coleman. AJ Harris just recently announced he would have been a returning starter for the Nittany Lions. Another returning starter, Elliot Washington, had announced that he's going into the portal. And I feel like part of this also has to do with the fact that maybe people are, at least I kind of am, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop. When is the mass exodus going to happen? And it might not be as big as people are expecting, but you're still going to see a number of Penn State players go into the portal. So sooner rather than later, you would like to see some news linking other players, whether they're from Iowa State or somewhere else, that they're interested in Penn State, just to kind of offset this.
That is absolutely right. I'm sure as a Penn State grad and fan, you're in that boat too. It's pretty simple. You need a little morale boost if you're a fan, if you're a booster, and I'm sure that coaching staff, they probably have some stuff under wraps. They know some guys that are coming, but you also need a big name to get other people to be enticed to come to Penn State during this rebuild. It can happen pretty quick there. You guys obviously have a lot of money. What is it, $700 million rebuild on the stadium? Like there's obviously cash there. I don't think it'll take that long, but this is actually the first step for that coaching staff, because they recruited differently at Iowa State than they're going to have to at Penn State. It's another level.
Yeah.
This is an important selling point. You're going to get a little bit of a look into Matt Campbell and everybody on that staff. Hey, what can they do? Because this isn't as easy as it normally is in a normal time with Penn State, just going on the recruiting trail, Ohio kids, West Virginia kids, New Jersey, and of course, PA. No, this is across the country, all hands on deck. They need something. I'm curious to see who that first big name is and why. That's going to be a fun story to follow.
Well, it could be Rocco Becht. It could be some of those secondary players. 5 defensive backs from Iowa State have entered into the portal, but Penn State just can't become Iowa State 2.0. They're going to have to go and get other quality players that are transferring out from different schools. Right now, I mean, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that a little more in depth about who Penn State should target, but also retain on this current roster by all means. Now, let's focus on who Penn State knows is going to be leaving, right? Chaz Coleman. Okay, it's no secret. He's going to Ohio State, excuse me. He's going to Ohio State. He's from the state of Ohio. I imagine that's where he wanted to go to school, but the Buckeyes really didn't recruit him as strongly as they could have and should have. So they essentially get a mulligan by misevaluating him out of high school. I mean, again, 24/7 has him as the top player that is in the portal currently, above other quarterbacks as well. And then AJ Harris goes in. When I told you that up front before we even hit record, you said that guy's a really good player. You guys are missing out on a couple of game changers there. Elliot Washington, but it's also, is Tony Rojas going to leave? It seems like the writing on the wall that he's going to end up in the portal. Would Matt Campbell end up following him? They're really close. They're really good friends. They're both from the state of Virginia. So it's not only the fact that Coleman is in the portal, Washington and Harris, a couple other backups that were on the team are also in the portal. Birchmeyer, an offensive lineman, Joey Schlaffer, a tight end. But just the idea that we're probably going to see more names and some more starters, and hopefully Penn State's going to be able to recover and go get those players that are comparable to those guys.
Yeah, how do you get that done? That is going to be a wild ride. Penn State's going to be the most fun for me running the Portal podcast, I can assure you, because they're going to need guys Well, I mean, it's just going to be a blast for me because guys from all over the country. I don't get to see Penn State do that. They never had to do anything like this.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you'll have a different view on it. But at the same time, you're going to see guys from Texas, California, state of Washington, Boston, everywhere, down south, end up at Penn State. There might be some guys that are G6, FBS that you don't know much about. Then you look them up, start watching film, you're like, oh, this guy's pretty good. A lot of guys, kind of like Chaz, who got a little bit overlooked, end up at different schools, a Charlotte or a Troy or whatever. They're going to have to scour everywhere. We're going to find out just how good. This is where Matt Campbell and his staff made their bones. They were tremendous at evaluating at the high school level. Kids from small towns, and I'm like, where's that at? And like, I'm a human roadmap because I followed recruiting my whole life. They get kids from towns every year I've never heard of. And they end up being all conference in the Big 12.
They had to go get those kinds of players.
They couldn't. Because look, Iowa State's not attracting any kids from, Miami Northwestern.
Nope. No,
it's not happening.
Not a chance.
So, but at the same time, they also have the opportunity to still get a few of the guys and try to retain as much as they can. That part, I have no idea what's going to happen, but let's not forget about retention is still important to the best of their ability.
Well, that's why we're going to talk about that in depth in the upcoming segment. So, Brian, kind of put your stamp on it right now. Call your shot. I don't think it's the end of the world because I think Penn State will be able to get quality players. You're also losing a lot of seniors too. We expected this team to look completely different from 2025 to 2026, but now it's going to be a lot more radical with a literal coaching change. But Chaz Coleman, even if James Franklin was still at Penn State, I don't know that's a guarantee that he would have been back for that next season. You said he's a game wrecker. Good luck with trying to replace his production and his potential. I've already said that this guy could potentially be a top 10 NFL draft pick. True freshman, polished pass rushing moves, a guy that hasn't played a lot of defensive end. The best is still yet to come for Chaz Coleman, if you can believe that. But then you add in AJ Harris, Elliot Washington. See, here's what gives me at least confidence, but it's speculative confidence. It's the fact that Iowa State has so many talented defensive backs already in the portal. I wonder how those conversations have gone. They probably said, hey, look, AJ Harris, Elliot Washington, you guys are good, but you're going to get into some battles for playing time with guys that started for us at Iowa State a season ago. I think of Jontez Williams and Jeremiah Cooper in particular, because those guys were the faces of that defense, but they went down with injury early in the season. If Penn State can get them, all right, AJ Harris, Elliot Washington, not as big of losses. But it's difficult for me to say, okay, you're going to go find a superstar defensive end comparable to Chaz Coleman. Probably not. What are you going to do at linebacker if Tony Rojas and Amari Campbell both leave? What about Ethan Grunkemeyer and Rocco Becht? Isn't a sure thing to Penn State. It's just not a guarantee. It's likely, but it's not a guarantee. If you lose Grunkemeyer, if you don't get Rocco Becht, this is where this conversation can kind of get out of control.
I'm curious about the quarterback thing. Rocco is an obvious plug and play because he knows the quarterback coach and all that. Great guy. I've known him since he was like a junior in high school. But if they don't go that route, I don't know what they're going to do unless it's a one-year guy, because I'm sure they're going to try to keep Grunkemeyer, but even then he may not want to stay. So that's a tough spot if you're Penn State. You got to know straight up, hey, if we take somebody or you leave, it's got to be yes or no. That gets really touchy. But outside, quarterback's always that way. Outside of that, though, I think they should dump money in young linemen. Penn State has always been a lineman school. And again, like, they're not going to replace Chaz. Okay. But they lost some good offensive linemen that were going to be graduating anyway. Like, make sure you get as many linemen as you can. There's a reason that Penn State's always been at that upper tier. It's the big fellas. If you don't have that, you could be Wisconsin real quick. They lost the lineman edge. Mm-hmm. They won 4 games this year. They're losing too many kids in state to Iowa State, Illinois, other places, and they're getting murdered. Penn State needs to go in the portal and get some of those guys and then restock in this next recruiting class with offensive linemen and defensive linemen. That would be my biggest question.
Okay, so now we're at that point of the conversation. Players that Penn State should want to retain, players that Penn State is going to target, hopefully, out of the transfer portal and get them to come to Penn State to offset some of these losses that are tangible, but also hypothetical. We're going to discuss that next here on this Locked On Crossover. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL Sundays move fast, one big play, and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as soon as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. Live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. FanDuel lets you jump into that moment. You have live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly. Player props update as guys heat up. You can bet next touchdown scores, drive results, totals, and more. It keeps you locked into every snap, every drive, every possibility. You have NFL football that you can bet on. You have college football as well. Lines are available for Penn State versus Clemson in this upcoming bowl game. Penn State is a 3.5-point underdog, plus 128 on the money line. The total is set at 48.5, minus 154 for the Clemson money line if you're thinking the Tigers are going to win this one. And you can bet those lines over at FanDuel.com or the FanDuel app. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, all you got to do is visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets. That is FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. Thank you for making Locked On Nittany Lions and the Portal your first listener watch of today. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network out there. If you haven't already, go check out our all-new Everydayer Club. What is the Everydayer Club? You get access to an ad-free feed for Locked On Nittany Lions or the Portal or a host, all of our Locked On shows compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. You'll also get an invitation to the members-only Locked On Everydayer Club Discord server, which includes a group chat just for listeners of these shows. Go to the link down in the show notes to learn more. That is the Everydayer Club. There are a number of players that Penn State should want to retain that Matt Campbell can absolutely build a team around. If I'm going to start anywhere, I'm starting with guys, Brian, that I would describe as leaders, okay? Because I think this team needs some sort of identity shift, identity check, because I think they had an identity crisis from last year. You know, whether it was, well, this guy shouldn't have been making this much NIL and guys concerned about their NFL future. And when I said this team became more about me than about we, I think I was pretty spot on. And then you hear the leaked audio of the players meeting and everything else. And it's just like, yeah, you can hear it in the way that they're talking about the team and the former coaching staff. If you're going to build out, so talent's one thing. I need guys that are going to represent Penn State to the fullest. If I'm going on offense, Andrew Rapplier at tight end, and offensive line Cooper Cousins. If I'm going on defense, I'm going two guys in the secondary. You know this player very well, Brian. King Mack out of this. He's a former Florida prospect, and Darius Dixon all the way in the state of California. See, that's what I mean. Those guys, I can totally reason with King Mack potentially leaving. Darius Dixon, since the entire coaching staff is different. You're from the state of California. I can absolutely understand why you would want to go home or closer to home. But if I had to pick two players on each side of the football, that's who I'm going with, because I feel like those guys are just no-nonsense leaders that you can honestly maybe even make captains for next season based on who Penn State has presently.
Yeah, if they could be the turnaround people, that would be a really cool role. And they're good players anyway, obviously. But like King Mack, just use him for an example. He played at St. Thomas Aquinas. It's a program, by the way. It's won 7 straight state titles in the state of Florida. They're doing pretty good.
Oh, just only that many?
Yeah. I need to call Roger and tell him to tune it up a little bit. But they've done a great job of producing kids like this. That on the field, they're very aggressive. Off the field, they're God-fearing, academically inclined. They're just good guys, and they go to class. Like that kid fits Penn State. I'm curious to see if he ends up going, because I think Penn State's a great fit for King. I don't know what he's looking for, but that defense, the way they use it, because he's down, like he can run and he can hit. They blitz and do different things with the safeties and stuff. Like he's a good fit for that. I would think it'd be pretty exciting for him. And then just in general, anybody in that mold, like you got a chance to turn around Penn State. That would be a really cool thing to be a part of for the rest of your life. That's just my take.
Be a good resume builder, to say the least, right?
Like, Penn State alums would probably thank you with an opportunity at their job, I'm sure.
Well, that was already the discourse around the two guys that had committed to the class of 2026 on signing day, and Peyton Falzone. Different conversation, but Peyton Falzone and Jackson Ford, the support, the outpouring of support was ludicrous. It was off the charts, but it shows just how willing the Penn State community is going to back you if you stay to support the Penn State community. Other guys, look, Brian, Kobe Howard is a player that I wouldn't necessarily describe him as a leader right away now, maybe in due time if he stayed at Penn State. But when we're talking about the talent, Kobe Howard could be wide receiver 1 for Penn State, should be wide receiver 1 for Penn State next season. Just given all the turnover of the veterans, you don't know who's going to follow Matt Campbell from Iowa State or anybody else in the portal. Kobe Howard can be that year 2 breakout type of player. But again, is he going to want to stay at Penn State when he's all the way from Florida?
I don't know. He's lived in Pensacola and South Florida. Those kids, it's hard to predict. But at the same time, he's just getting to know the new staff. Who knows what they're going to have in store for him? Yeah, that's impossible to predict. He's a good kid. His dad's a good guy. I'll be curious on that because, again, he can be, like you said, wide receiver 1. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, he needs to know who the freaking quarterback coach is going to be, who the quarterback's going to be, and like all that. How's that going to sync? Because there's no two positions in football more connected, or any sport really, than quarterback and wide receiver. So they need to figure out that real quick for not only Kobe, but anybody else that's tight end or receiver. That's something that Penn State's got to do. They got to get quarterback wrapped up. That's difficult. And if they can, then they can probably not only get Kobe to stay, they can get guys added. They're going to have to spend some cash on a quarterback.
Okay, so then let's pivot there. So this is kind of a bridge between players that Penn State should want to retain / target out of the portal. They have Ethan Grunkemeyer. Rocco Becht could be a target. Brian, where do you stand on that? You know Rocco Becht very well since he's out of the Florida area. He's been at Iowa State for the past 4 years. He's been a starter for multiple years. He knows the head coach. He knows the offensive coordinator. He knows the quarterback's coach. It's already, insiders are already saying, portal insiders are already saying, and you know this, that it's not a guarantee that he ends up at Penn State, even though all the signs point that way. However, Penn State already has a quarterback that can be the quarterback of the future for 3 years potentially. Ethan Grunkemeyer proved that he is a capable starter at the Big Ten level, and I think he's only scratching the surface. I don't think Penn State can go wrong with either QB. Just know you're getting Rocco Becht for 1 year or you're getting Ethan Grunkemeyer for 3. I think where the conversation gets questionable, or at least you can debate it, is what do you want to do with the depth chart? Ethan Grunkemeyer, no quarterback's going to want to come in because they know that he will be like, you're going to be the backup. That's all you're ever going to be if you transfer into Penn State as a quarterback with Grunkemeyer as the QB. You're going to be QB2. That is tougher to recruit in the portal than it is to say, hey, Rocco Becht's going to be QB1 for 1 season. And then you could be the QB of the future. I guess you could sell that to Grunkemeyer potentially if you're Matt Campbell, but I don't see that happening. How you go from starting 6 games in the season to being back on the bench.
That would be unusual. The only ways you could do that is if he really likes the quarterback coach and the NIL is outstanding. Not one or the other, both. So I have no doubts that Penn State has the money, but how do you want to allocate it? Like, didn't they recruit him at Iowa State?
They did. They did.
Well, that's
some precedent.
Intriguing. That's intriguing because there are certain programs that, like, you're going to stay in contact with him and all that. I'm curious about that one. He might have a chance to stay, like Rocco playing behind him, warning behind him would probably be good. And Rocco's a really good guy. So there's a chance, but yeah, playing time matters too. But where's he going? Like, Ohio State, I'm sure he probably wanted to go to Ohio State out of high school. Like if he could have had his drug, he's an Ohio kid. He ain't going there. Where's he going?
Virginia Tech.
That really, what I mean?
Like James Franklin's there and his quarterback coach is there. If Ethan Grunkemeyer is not at Penn State, I fully expect him to be at Virginia Tech.
If that's the case, so be it. But that's not exactly a loaded wide receiver room. Just saying. So maybe that changes. I don't know. Maybe Indiana, they're losing a court, maybe something like that. But like, I don't know where he's going for sure. I get the Tech thing, but be careful for what you wish for. He has a lot of familiarity with Penn State players, and he already knows some of the Iowa State guys that came over to Penn State. That may not be a bad option.
Okay. Players that they should want to target. Well, Rocco Becht. We mentioned him.
Sure.
Basically anybody that's from Iowa State that's already in the portal, but I don't want to just say every single former Iowa State player because that's the easy one. Players in particular, though, Jeremiah Cooper and Jontez Williams.
Yes.
Those two guys, and you're familiar with them since, again, from the state. One of them is from the state of Florida, so you know one of them very well. But those two guys, before the injury, and conveniently enough, not for Iowa State, but they both got hurt at the end of September, in the middle, one in the middle of game week, and then the one in the middle of the Arizona game. Those two guys were the faces of the defense. Part of the reason Iowa State didn't live up to expectations this past season was because they lost not one, but two star defenders in the same week. Jeremiah Cooper, Jontez Williams. With AJ Harris and Elliot Washington going in the portal, the quick fix right there is getting those two guys to join Penn State.
Yeah, like Jontez is one of those guys that was kind of a late bloomer on the recruiting scene. He's from a small town in North Florida, out in the middle of nowhere. But like we all knew he could run, he could play, and he figured it out. And now that he's coming off injury, I'm curious to see who all goes after him. I'm sure the Iowa State coaches that are now at Penn State are all about him. Who else is going to go after him though? Because they were good. Even though they lost those two guys, they only gave up 20.2 points per game this year. That's really good.
Yeah,
because that could have went sideways really, really quick. Hats off to that staff. They had to throw it together and figure it out. I'm sure there were some times that was hard, but I think that's one of the reasons the offense went a little bit slower and did some things the way they did because they were trying to protect their defense a little more, which I get. But if you add Williams, like and I'm partial to Florida players, but if you add a kid like that, that's twitchy like he is, that can tackle, it can run. I mean, that defense may not be bad next year. They got some linemen. Let's see who all gets in for Penn State, but
yeah.
Defense may not be. It'll be harder on offense because that's more about continuity and under the playbook. But man, adding Williams, even if they just got him, would help you tremendously.
I think defense will be just fine. Yeah, it's a question of because you don't know who the quarterback's going to be. They don't even have a running backs coach at this point. As we say, because we're going to talk about that. So you mentioned that the Iowa State coaching staff really held this team together despite all the injuries. And talk about the injuries on defense. Rocco Becht was dealing with not one, but two shoulder injuries this past season, and the team still finished 8-4. That's a testament of the coaching staff that has mostly all come over from Iowa State, but there are still some position groups that don't have an answer, well, including defensive coordinator, one of the most important ones. We're going to talk about that next here on this Locked On Crossover. And this episode is brought to you by Game Time. There's nothing like college football. The tailgates, the packed stadiums, being right in the middle of it all. The energy, the bands, the moments you remember forever. But actually getting tickets, that part used to be frustrating with long queues, logins, prices jumping at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the easiest way to unlock amazing college football tickets and experiences in just a few taps. You can open up the Game Time app to look at upcoming college football games, choose your favorite team, or any game that you want to attend, and you'll be surprised how fast you are able to find great seats. The app is incredibly easy to use. You can go from browsing to buying tickets in just minutes. Probably one of the best features, you'll be able to see the view from your seat before buying. So there's no second guessing. You know exactly what your point of view is going to look like ahead of time. You also got zone deals where you pick a section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save even more money. Plus, knowing the prices that include all the fees up front make the whole process stress-free. Take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that is code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Brian, you've been passively raving about what the job that Iowa State did collectively. Well, that's good news for Penn State because most of that staff came over with Matt Campbell, quarterbacks coach, offensive coordinator / tight ends coach, offensive line coach, wide receiver coach, defensive backs coach. but there are still some gaps to be filled. Penn State is expected to retain Deion Barnes at defensive line, but we still don't have the announcement that, oh, this guy's on board. Same thing with Dan Connor at linebacker. You got Terry Smith. You were able to retain Terry Smith. That is a major plus because he's going to be your second in command. So you have Matt Campbell, Terry Smith, and a lot of the best parts of that Iowa State staff from a season ago. The biggest question marks, okay, when are you going to announce Deion Barnes, Dan Connor, and Trace McSorley, the assistant quarterbacks coach behind Jake Waters? When are you going to also make a decision on running backs coach? Okay, running back is going to see a significant turnover unless you hire somebody in-house. I've already suggested Charles Walker. He was an assistant running backs coach for a while. He was J1 Sider's right-hand man. Big fan of J1 Sider. We saw how much of a loss it was this past season with no Sider on staff. If Charles Walker is even somewhat of the coach that J1 Sider is, I think that's a plus. So Penn State's coaching staff, I think, is going to be one of the better ones in the Big Ten in due time because you're combining the best that was at Iowa State, and you're also combining some of the best parts of this Penn State staff.
I think that's a great point. The running backs coach, by the way, is going to be somebody that can recruit traditionally. So that's an important thing to get. How they blend together, and you're talking about like D-line coach, that's a totally different scheme that they run up front. I wonder if that's one of the reasons they're trying to figure this out, because the way you coach in a 4-3 or 4-2-5 compared to what Iowa State ran is about like the politics in Russia compared to United States. They have nothing in common.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of moving parts. It's very complex, where Penn State was more attacking. I'm curious about that. So I would like to know who the DC is, but I'm guessing they're trying to figure out, okay, well, is Barnes going to be here? Or how are we going to do that discussion's probably going on daily because they got good coaches they could make like co-coordinators, but I wonder if they're trying to tie in one of the Penn State guys into it too, try to get everybody on the same. That's got to be really hard. I wouldn't bet on any one thing happening, but it's very important.
Well, D'Anton Lynn over at USC. I feel like that is the only hire that Penn State could make. Yes, there are other hires. Anthony Poindexter could and should be considered. Does John Haycock want to be the defensive coordinator essentially as a placeholder for a year because he was contemplating retirement, but it looks like he's going to be trending towards a senior analyst role because they're going after D'Anton Lynn. But USC is not making this easy. Based on what's been described to me, Brian, is that it is a tug of war between Penn State and USC to either keep or get D'Anton Lynn. That one of the best assistant hires of this offseason, if Penn State's able to get D'Anton Lynn. It is odd to me, though, Brian, that Penn State has hesitated to announce all of the, because it's expected. It's expected that Penn State's going to retain Barnes and Connor and McSorley, but the announcements have not been official. And it doesn't seem, again, you're missing out on defensive line recruiting. You're missing out on linebacker recruiting. And until you know your defensive coordinator, I can reason with that because you can't just offer any defensive lineman. You can't just offer any linebacker. They have to fit the defense that you're running. But you also kind of have an idea of what you are going to be running in due time. Anyway, Penn State's got to get D'Anton Lynn, long story short here, to really complete the staff. Then you start to build out an all-star staff if you're Matt Campbell, if you can add D'Anton Lynn to this formula.
That would be a huge hire. Not only is he a good coach, he's a pretty good recruiter. He's respected. He's got NFL ties. Like, that would be really interesting. I'm curious what makes him want to come to Penn State under this. Are USC supposed to be training up?
Penn State's his alma mater.
Oh, I did not know that. Well, there it is. Yeah. Well, maybe that's going to be the draw because, like, he could be the hero. Mm-hmm. That would be part of it. But wow, that would be a major blow to the Trojans. So that's wild. I'm curious about that now. Can his defense? I don't know how much he would adjust it to what's going on with Iowa State. That might be part of the conversation too. Again, that's a very unique defense. Are they going to overhaul it with all those Iowa State coaches? That's a great talking point for days and days. But I'm fascinated. I don't know what he's going to do because I'm sure Penn State is going to have a lot of money to throw at him, but I know USC does too.
I don't know what the backup plan is. Because there's really no other momentum or no other signs pointing to somebody else, I assume that John Haycock would get consideration because he was the Iowa State defensive coordinator. But again, he was contemplating retirement. Anthony Poindexter was the co-defensive coordinator for these past few seasons. He has been somebody that was potentially the next defensive coordinator, but then they hired Jim Knowles, then they hired Tom Allen. Poindexter was considered, but he never ultimately got the job. What is Penn State's backup plan if USC is able to retain D'Anton Lynn? That's what I don't know.
I haven't heard anything, but that would be hard.
Neither have I.
You know what I mean? That would, because he's alma mater. You need something to kind of go your way. If you could have him on your staff, I mean, you could be a lot better in year one than anticipated.
Yeah.
You go bowling and maybe a decent bowl. That changes a lot of the algorithm. So that's a big factor for Penn State. And he also might help you finish out the staff on the other side. Who knows? Because he's got a lot of contacts. That's a big one.
And that's where we're going to wrap things up on this Locked On crossover. Depending on when you're watching this, Merry Christmas, everybody. Thank you. Happy holidays. Thank you so much for joining us on this crossover episode. He is Brian Smith, the college football expert, recruiting expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, host of The Portal, and contributes to a variety of other shows here on the network. My name is Zach Seyko, your host of Locked On Nittany Lions. As always, subscribe to our respective YouTube channels and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around all the teams that you follow, whether it's Penn State or anybody else, or this crazy portal activity that is going to be here before you know it. Brian, I thank you so much for the time. Again, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Can't wait to chat with you again, hopefully before the new year, about all things Penn State and everything portal related.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, sir.